Hello and welcome to Azure's Live Mert to the Future. After a long break, I am back with an awesome guest. Chris Reddington will be with us this evening. And I think you don't need an introduction, but this is my classical question. So can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for having me back as well, Mert. So,
You're
although
welcome.
not back, I guess it was a different show, wasn't it? So, new show.
Yeah,
So,
this show.
congratulations on the new show and hello.
Thank you.
So, Chris Reddington, if anyone's tuning in who maybe here to speak before, last time I worked at Microsoft, I was a cloud solution architect back then. These days, I now work at Github. I'm a senior enterprise advocate there. So my job day to day is to help enterprise developers, kind of engineering leads, execs, all understand how GitHub is awesome and how you can use it as your enterprise day to day tool. Because lots of people always think, hey, GitHub is that amazing open source platform where everyone puts stuff up there. But actually, we have some brilliant capabilities for enterprises as well. So that's my job.
Okay, great. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
Before we start, I have another classical question because usually people ask me that question, and my answer is always it depends. I think you know what the question is.
I know
Uh,
exactly what's coming.
yeah,
Yep.
and there's an Azure DevOps option, and also GitHub and GitHub Actions, Azure Pipelines. People always confuse which one is the correct one for me.
Yeah.
So, what to say about it?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. And I think the other question I always hear with that is what's happening with Azure DevOps, people thinking that it's going away, and it's not going away. They are two different tools. They are both brilliant. Of course, there's some overlap. But even with the overlap, I think they handle things in very different ways. So, as an example, if you think about like Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps has an awesome heritage where it came from Team Foundation Server and all the other kind of products that it was before that, I guess, Azure DevOps Server, etc. So it's got a really rich heritage there. But GitHub does things differently because, of course, GitHub started as an open source tool. And what you see with how the enterprise offerings are shaping is they're designed in a very GitHub way, if that makes sense. So, when you think about like how you collaborate internally within an organization, you've got pull requests, you mention people. Yes, Azure DevOps has that, but you've got the timeline capability in GitHub. You've got discussions. You've got lots of these different pieces where it's kind of a social not experiment, a social experience, and I guess it leans itself more towards like inner sourcing kind of approaches, being able to collaborate effectively internally, bring down those barriers. Not to say that's not possible in Azure DevOps, but it's not kind of the default. There's a very rich permissions model in there, etc. So I guess what I'm saying is like just an example of those two. I don't think there's a one right answer necessarily. I think if you're on Azure DevOps, awesome, it's a great tool, keep on using it. But if you think there's elements in GitHub that are actually, you'd like to try those out because, for example, code spaces, you can't use code spaces outside of GitHub. Maybe that's something that would be really helpful, which might make you decide, actually, maybe we want to try GitHub for that reason. So, like you said at the beginning, you're spot on. It does depend. But I think the main thing I'd say is it doesn't have to be like all or nothing. Like you could use GitHub repos with Azure Pipelines or GitHub repos and GitHub Actions with Azure Boards or, GitHub issues and the product stuff just came out recently. So there's an interesting mix that you can use depending on what really works best for you. So I think it's just going in, making sure what works for you, what works best, because every organization is different, and going from there is probably what I'd say to that.
Okay, before we start, I have another question about GitHub.
Yeah.
There is an on-prem solution, GitHub Enterprise Server.
Yes.
And what is the differences between GitHub and enterprise server? For example, can I use code spaces on enterprise server?
Good question. In all honesty, I wouldn't be able to tell you the full list of what you can and can't do as the differences between the two. It's a bit like Azure DevOps Server and Azure DevOps Services, if you want a comparison. So GitHub Enterprise Server, you basically get a virtual machine, you install the image as an appliance, you run it, you maintain it, you look after it yourself. Same kind of idea. So when there's an upgrade, you're responsible for doing that upgrade. You've got to make sure you go from 3.2 to 3.3, 3.3 to 3.4, etc., etc. So with that, it's a bit like Azure DevOps, where the features will land in GitHub Enterprise Cloud first, but then they'll be kind of ported to Enterprise Server as and when they can. So there is always a lag, to be fair. I think the lag isn't too much now these days. But if you want the latest and greatest and you want all of that innovations happening, you probably want to get onto the Enterprise Cloud if you can. I think right now, for example, hosted runners are not supported in Enterprise Server. So a bit like in Azure DevOps, where Azure DevOps manages the runners for you, or GitHub would manage the runners for you. You can't use those from your Enterprise Server deployment. Code spaces, for example, you can't use. And I think there'll be some kind of feature differences as well if we started looking piece by piece. But yeah, generally there's a bit of a lag, I'd say.
Okay, thank you. So today, I am sure you have a great presentation, but what will you do show us today? I am sure not only repositories.
No, not only repositories. You're spot on. I mean, I'm someone who likes demoing on the fly and actually showing something rather than going for slides and everything else. And what I want to show is, people might know Cloud with Chris. I think you've been on the show as well, of course, before as well.
Yeah.
So people may have heard me speak about it before. But I really want to talk about how GitHub is helping me with all of that, as in the platform, not as an employer, but the platform itself. And just all of the capabilities that are there. So I think you're spot on with the first point is, I'm not going to just be talking about repositories. Even though I'm on the screen, there is repositories. Yes, repositories are there. But there's so much more than repositories these days. So what I'd like to do, if you would indulge me for a bit, is take us through the kind of software lifecycle, as if you and I were working on a feature, let's say. So we might say, right, we want to go and add Mert to the Futures episode, Mert to Futures like talk, because I'm talking on your show right now, to my site. So let's kind of go through that process. So the first thing would be, for me, I need to plan that, because that's some work. We need to plan that work and make sure that, compared with all the other things on the backlog, that it's prioritized the right amount, etc. So I'm just going to create a new issue. You can see here I've got these two different kind of issue types, if you like. And what's really cool with these is they're forms, essentially. So one of the things you can do with public repositories right now, I can't remember if it's there for private repositories yet, or it might be a certain SKU. You can use these GitHub issue workflow, GitHub issue forms, I should say, sorry. And what this allows you to do is just have a structured way of capturing your information that comes in. Then what it looks like is still what we're used to with GitHub issues, just Markdown. So we can see there the answers to each of those different questions. So it's nice and clean, nice and organized as a layout. So let's say I'm just going to open a blank issue. I'm going to call it a talk, and I'm going to say, Chris talks about GitHub on Mert to the Future. Add this episode for 11th August 2022. We might add some labels onto that as well. Priority is critical because I forgot to put it on the website, so I need to go and correct that. So let's do that here. We'll add some assignees, so we'll add me, and we'll add that to my project as well, content creation. And that is it. We've created our issue. Awesome. So at this point, I might be coming in here, and if I'm collaborating with others, I might go and use that @ tag, for example, to go and mention them in terms of issues, etc., and get that collaboration going. But I might want to create a branch for this issue, for example, as well. So if I go and do that, we'll just go and rename that branch to something like Mert to the future update. There we go. And you can see we'll create a branch there. And it already gives me those helpful steps of what I would need to do to go ahead, pull those changes down. But we're not going to pull those changes down. Not yet, anyway. What we will do first is we will look at projects. So this is an issue, of course. We know this. We've got lots of other issues that we're working with, but I don't know about you, Mert, but seeing all of those things in a list, it's not very visual to me. I'm not really sure what's more priority over the other thing. It'd be nicer to see it in a different way. So what we can actually do is we can use these projects capabilities, which for some reason seem to be disabled on my organization, interestingly. There we go. No, they're not. It's there. So I don't know what's going on with that repo. I'll need to take a look at that later. But you can see anyway, here is the issues that were in that same repository. And we should see somewhere, did I add it? No, I didn't add it. Let me go back and make sure I added it correctly. So what you do with those issues, if I go back, there we go, is you associate them with a project. So, I didn't associate it with a status. So this is actually a good part of the demo. Let's do this. So let me go back to my Cloud with Chris project, content creation, and we're back. So what you'll see here is I've got a board of different cards here. But you can see I've got this search bar underneath saying minus no status. So what I'm saying is any issues that have been associated with my project board, but have a status assigned to them. So they're either to do, they're in progress, or they're done. If I remove that status, you can see that suddenly I've got a load more issues over here that, and pull requests as well, I should add, that have no status associated against them. So I'm just going to put that status back like that. No, it's not status, is it? Sorry, minus status, none, I should say. No status, there we go. So you can see now we're back to where we were. Now what I could do is I could come across to my other tab, take a look, and you can see actually, this looks like a table, this looks like a spreadsheet. It's something that I can easily scroll through, take a look through. You can see that actually I'm grouped by some other information as well. So if I just drop down this menu here, you can see, excuse me, that we can group by different pieces of information. So milestone, assignees, status, repository. So the interesting thing here is these issues are all coming from different repositories. So this is where I managed a theme for my website. So I've open sourced themes so that anyone can use it. So these are all the issues that I'm working on there. These are the issues in terms of my presentations that I'm putting onto my presentations subdomain, sub website. And this is like my content calendar, my content feed, if you like. So you can see that actually, if I'm running this inside my enterprise as a startup, as a business, whatever, I can pull in all those issues from different repositories. If different teams have those different repositories, then I can go ahead and start bringing together that unified view, which is really, really powerful to start getting people collaborating with each other. So you can see, I can create more and more of these tabs as I like. They're very lightweight. I can go and add more fields as I like and change them. I can add my filters as well. And ultimately, the idea behind these projects is that they're really flexible, so that you can make the views that are important to you, and you can make it work for you. So yeah, this is the kind of new GitHub projects experience. It's really cool, and you're not just limited to the kind of default status as well. That is a field. You could go and add, let's say, due date, for example. So if I put due date in there, and then we go back, we can do some really cool things with this. So if we go and add the field due date, oh, it's already there, great. I can say, right, the due date for this one, let's say, was 1st of August 2022. So now I can have a tab for things which are overdue, and then use the filter to look for things by due date. Oops, if I tab correctly, and then go something like that, anywhere from before today. So now I can see anything which is maybe overdue, missed its deadline, and needs to be urgently prioritized, for example. So, this is just based on us talking. Really, really powerful here.
Okay. How about the permissions? I saw the manage access.
How about what? Sorry, Mert?
Permissions. I saw the manage access
Permissions.
settings.
Yes. Yeah. So it's all based upon a couple of factors. So do you have visibility of the project? So the project, I believe, is either there's public or private right now. But then the issues that come into that project, you need to have access to, like, that repository, for example. So you need to be able to view, let's say, the cloudwithchris.com repository to be able to see those issues. You need to be able to view that repository to be able to view those issues, for example. So it's very much done on the kind of aggregated permissions. So hopefully that answers and clears it up.
Okay. So are there any limitations for creating the tabs? For example, you cannot create tabs more than 10 or something like that.
Good question. I don't know. I'll just keep creating for the rest of the session. Yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest. I haven't heard any come up, put it that way. But I think the thing that I like is you've seen how quickly I'm, flicking between these different things. Just how quick it is really, really impressive, actually. Yeah. So yeah, GitHub issues and GitHub projects. That's kind of the first part, I guess. And I'll go back later and delete all of these views now. I probably wish I never started opening, but there we go. Let's jump back to my repository. Oops, not to the organization, to my repository. So we have a branch, but now I actually need to go and do some code. We planned that is going to happen. This issue is going to happen. We know it's a critical priority. We're going to go ahead. We're going to enter the due date as today, and the status is in progress because I've taken it and we're now working on it. So at this point, I need to start coding, but I've just realized I'm on my other machine right now. I don't have Go installed on this machine. I don't have Hugo. I don't have my theme or any of the frameworks and dependencies. It's going to take me ages to get set up and get running. But actually, no, because what I can use, as we talked about earlier, is GitHub Codespaces. So GitHub Codespaces effectively allows me to have my development machine anywhere. The way it works is I have this folder in my repository called a dev container folder, and I have two different files here. And let me just zoom in so you can see those. We got the Docker file here, and we got the dev container.json. So Docker file, I think, is probably quite explanatory. I think everyone knows Docker files these days. This is the image that we're going to be running on. So this is the underlying compute, if you like, that will go and get created based upon this image. Then this dev container.json says, right, we're going to be creating from the Docker file that is in that folder We're going to pass in some arguments when we spin up that image as well. So we're going to use the latest version of Hugo. We're going to use this version of Node. We're going to use Hugo Extended. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to add some these properties into VS Code. We're going to enable these extensions as well. And whenever we run the port locally, it's going to be on 1313 and run as root. So this is just a recipe to say this is how I want that development environment to be. Go and make that happen, code spaces. So in the time that it's taken for me to explain that, my environment is up and running. So I didn't have to start downloading all those things. I didn't have to start figuring out, okay, is this dependency installed? Having to manage mismatching dependencies. It's all there. And the beauty is it's in my web browser. I'm not running on my local VS Code on my machine. This is all in the web browser. If I wanted to, though, if I just close this one, I could. This is VS Code running in my local environment now, by the way. I could go and connect to code spaces from here and connect to the code space here. So it's running from my local clients, not the web browser, but it is still running up in GitHub. Everything that happens here is not on my machine. You know, it's in that container being hosted by GitHub there as well. So yeah, this is all really cool here, but we'll go back to the web browser. So the really important thing to understand is this is a container running behind the scenes. So there is compute. So I can go ahead, for example, and run something like, let me just copy the URL here. Copy address, good. So if I remember my Hugo commands correctly, Hugo serve base URL is going to copy in that, and then we won't append any ports, and I think that's good. There we go. So now you can see I'm getting a lot of warnings, and I know why that is, because I haven't actually downloaded the theme yet to this container. It's not something I set up on it yet. So that would be an extra step that I would need to go and do. So you can see it's not quite rendering correctly right now. So I need to go and fix that, which I won't do during the stream. But the point that I'm trying to show here is that's how easy it is for me to run those commands that I have locally in my environment, just the same as I would just in here in the container as well. So yeah, I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions, Mert?
Yes. What if I close the browser and open that code space after, for example, a couple of hours?
Yep. So I guess anything that would be in the terminal, I think might be lost. I think would be lost. I'm not 100% on that one. But you know, in terms of like stage changes, etc., you'd be able to come back to those because that code space goes into like a dormant state, and you can then go ahead and reopen that once again just by coming over here, clicking once again, and you'll see this time it will be a lot quicker in terms of loading. Excuse me, because this is now all effectively running. So there we go, and we're back where we were.
So it keeps the container, right?
Yes.
It keeps the container created before and just start container. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But you would, I think it would rebuild the container depending on how long it's been inactive. But the states would be kind of stored. Yeah, exactly. I was going to add another point. I've completely forgotten what it was now. I'm sure it will come back if it's important.
Is it allowed live share?
No, it's not actually. But live share does work with this as well, actually, which is really cool. Let me just run this in the background, by the way, just to bring the theme locally into my environment. There we go. Now let's try See, there we go. If I'm pressing up, the terminal commands are gone. And that was just in between while the machine was kind of running. I remember what I was going to say now. An important distinction is the difference between code spaces and the lightweight web editor. So if I just press my full stop button in this repo, I get taken to a view that looks a lot like code spaces and looks a lot like Visual Studio Code, but it isn't. It's like a web UI VS Code kind of version is the easiest way to explain it. And you'll notice I don't have the terminal in here as an example. So I can't run those commands because there is no local compute here. This is just running in my browser right now. That's what's running here. So if I close this, those changes, like if I make a change here to my contributing file and say, this line's stupid, I don't need this line here anymore. If I close that, that's now gone. It's gone forever because it's in my browser. I don't know if they cache it locally on the browser whilst it's open, in fairness. There we go. So I can still see it there. But if I close the browser, of course, and then the cache goes, then it's gone. So different scenario to like code spaces where you have that persistent state behind the scenes there as well. So yeah, let me delete this command here again, and we'll try this again. So Hugo serve. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get the app running in this local environment here. So we can see port 1313 is already in use, interestingly. So let me just kill that. See what is going on. Okay. We'll kill that one. Now we'll run that again. There we go, that's better. So I'm going to be running effectively the application as if it were in my local environment. So it's the first time that it's being executed here. It'll take a bit of time. I've chosen the smallest code space just to keep my costs down. They come in tiers. So I think there's a 2 CPU and 4 gig, then it increments from there. And there are larger sizes, of course. But what it's doing on its first build, this is nothing to do with GitHub code spaces, why it's so slow. It's because of my app. So what my app does is when it builds, it generates all of the images, all of the different content that is on my site, and the HTML and the CSS, etc. Now, because I'm doing a lot of resizing and a lot of image manipulation, it takes a bit of time, which is why it takes a bit of time on the first one. But then the second one, the third one, it's all cached on the machine. So because we're going from a fresh code space, it'll just take a bit of time the first time it actually goes and builds there. But you could have these things pre-built as well. There is a capability in GitHub code spaces called pre-builds, which means you have everything ready to go for you to be productive, just like that, which is pretty cool.
Is that an extra feature? I mean, should I have to pay anything to use?
It's extra in the sense that you would pay, I think, for the compute and the storage of that kind of version, that pre-build. So there are some additional charges around it, which are worth looking into. But at that point, it's a conversation of how much more productivity do I get from my development team versus the cost that might increase. And, I'm sure a lot of people would find that actually the productivity cost is much greater as a benefit. Yeah. So let me just kill that and do that again, just in case it got stuck. What I want to do whilst we're waiting for that is also talk about another really cool service. Now this service, I should actually say before we move on, Codespaces right now is available for GitHub Teams or GitHub Enterprises, not yet available for individual users, let's say. So that is being worked on. There's more to come there, but it's currently in preview at the moment, public preview. Now, what I'm next going to talk about is GitHub Copilot. Now, GitHub Copilot is generally available for individuals, but not yet for like enterprises, teams, etc. So I will show you GitHub Copilot. Have you heard of it, Mert? Have you used it?
Yes, I use it, and I have a blog post about GitHub Copilot.
There we go. So I'm already talking to the people that know. This is great. But this is how good it is, right? If I just type main.go here, for example, and just type in create main function here, you can see already in the screen there, it's predicting what I'm going to need because I'm in a Go file, because I put the content create main function, or comment, I should say, and because I've also gone ahead and run func main as well. So if I go and run that, oops, do that again, you can see now we've got our hello world. So I haven't had to go and write anything apart from that initial comment. I've now got my first hello world application written in Go, which is really cool. But I could go and say, you know what, let's test that the output of main is a hello world string, something like that. So now I can go ahead and use Control Enter and start looking at different solutions to actually make me go and do that. And you can see there, maybe Copilot's misunderstood there a little bit because we're still in the main Go file. It's suggesting those things. So maybe what I would do, create a new test file and do something like that, let's say. And you might start getting some different results, for example. But the idea there is it's very much driven by the context of the file that you're in. It's based on OpenAI Codex, I believe. And yeah, is there to really improve that development experience. Think of those times where we're writing loads of unit tests and it's very repetitive, or think about those times where you know what you want to do broadly, but you don't know the finer details, and you just need that kind of pair programmer there to help you. And this is exactly what it's here for. Some cool things actually also. You can see here that we've got like some code, let's say. Have I got any better examples? Maybe not. We'll go with this one for now. I can go into Copilot Labs on the left-hand side, and I can highlight a block of code, and I can ask it to explain that code to me. So, it'll come back and just say, hey, you're just echoing hello world, you're putting hello world there. I can get, there we go. The package declaration is the first thing that is executed. Main function is the entry point. Main function, the only function that can be called from the package. So there's lots of comments actually. It looks like it's gone in a bit of a loop there actually, for some reason. But anyway, you get the idea. From very little, it's actually been able to produce some insights there for us, which is great.
So we can produce a simple documentation, maybe a draft.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I could go and copy and paste this, and I'm a dev. I don't like doing documentation, so there it is, done. But likewise, if I wanted to go and convert that into another language, for example, like, I don't know, let's go for PowerShell. There we go. Function main, write host, hello world. Like, how cool is that? We're able to just start translating and understanding. Like, this is really, really powerful. And I'm really excited to see what comes next with all of this. There's so many things, so many things that excite me with that. Anyway, let's go back to the main kind of thing we were doing here. So we were going and building the local environment. So I just need to do one additional thing here, which I think I have now done. So I think I can now run that. I realized I forgot to download my dependencies as well in my local environment. I thought I set that up. I didn't. My bad. So again, building in the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my content, to my talk, a folder, and I'm going to find, where did we last speak? It's been a while. There we go. Would have been one of these, I think. So I'm going to just paste that as a new folder. I'm going to call this something like Mert to the future GitHub overview, something like that. And I'm going to start updating this information here. So, I'm not on my local machine at all. I'm just in my web browser here, updating my website, updating the contents that are on there. So Chris joins Marietta on Mert to the future. Demonstrating how GitHub has some amazing capabilities beyond repositories. GitHub Copilot, GitHub Code Spaces, Actions, and more. Something like that, let's say. What's really fun and really interesting is when I'm writing blog posts and then Copilot is suggesting the next lines of my blog post to me. That's where it gets scary. It's actually pretty good and clever at that as well. So there we go. We might go here and remove those URLs, and I might need to update those a bit later. But then I might say, right, this is Mert to the future. We've got a banner, we've got tags for DevOps and GitHub, and we'll remove the YouTube link for now because that will come later. But there we go. That's my update. That's the content ready to go. So I'll put that in my new branch. So that'll be in fact, we actually have the branch. We created it already. So let me just switch the branch to that. We'll wait for that to come. There we go. And then I will just go and push up. I think I just need I'll leave it as MSHow2 for a moment. We can change that a bit later. But you can see, I've just made my changes. Now, hopefully, third time lucky, let's see, that my app will build here, is I'd be able to see then my local environment running. Now, I don't think it's actually gone and done it so far. It's been taking a bit of time tonight for some reason. Demo gods, always the way, unfortunately. Yeah. But maybe we'll come back to that one a bit later, as that one doesn't seem to be happening for us today. So let me just go and commit this to the branch anyway. So Mert to the future initial draft. Commit and push that. And what's great at this point is I've pushed it to that other branch, but I still don't need to leave my code space just yet. I can go to my GitHub extension over here, and I can say, right, I'm going to create a brand new pull request, and I'm going to merge this Mert to the future update to my main branch here, and then I'm going to complete all of my my default template that I've got there as well. But then I'm just going to go and hit create. So straight from within the code space, I've created the pull request, as well as coded, as well as used GitHub Copilot to help me be productive with those Go things I was working on as well. Now, actually what has happened, because I've opened that pull request, is a GitHub action has just started. So if we jump back to my code space, here we go. In this .github folder, we have this workflows folder. And here we have a load of YAML files. And if I take a look at this site deployment, this is just a YAML file explaining and describing the flow of what I want to happen in my CI/CD pipeline. So you can trigger it on push, you can trigger it on pull request. You can even trigger it on things like a GitHub issue being created, a label being added. Like, it's really powerful what you can do with GitHub Actions. I didn't warn you, but I'm going to give you a test at this point. What do you notice about this kind of syntax here, this naming convention? I'll just zoom in. Hold on. There we go. So actions/checkout at v3.
It looks like Azure pipelines, but not sure.
So I agree with you that last bit does. So like, what we're used to with Azure pipelines. But there's something really clever about GitHub Actions. So I'm just going to copy this part of the line here. Go to github.com/actions/checkout. And it's just another GitHub repository. And that is the beauty of GitHub Actions, is each action is just another repository somewhere. And that at v3 that you saw, well, there's a version of the repository here. There we go. They'll have the v3 tag associated with it. And this is the power behind, here we go, v3, you can see there. And this is the power behind GitHub Actions. Think about GitHub as that home of open source. Everyone's putting all of their open source pieces up onto GitHub. Where are they going to be making actions and storing them? On GitHub. So what does that mean? People are probably going to be kind of building their own actions for things and pushing them up there. So it's really, really powerful from that sense that we're building on top of the amazing work.
That's a very cool feature, I think.
Yeah. And this is it. It's like, was it Azure Actions maybe? Yeah, there we go. So like, I know you do a lot of work with Azure. Here you can find all of the Azure Actions, for example, and what they are, and those there as well. So, there's some really powerful ways of working here. Like one of my own actions, for example, I created. I think it was the Hugo Cross poster. No, I've forgotten the name of it now. Here we go. No dashes. Hugo Cross poster. So this was one that I wrote so that as soon as I publish a blog on my site, so the RSS feed, it automatically publishes the same write-up onto dev2 and medium.com as well. And I've been able to write that in .NET and have that running as a container as part of the GitHub Action workflow. Like, how cool is that? Like, I've been able to automate that and make that as part of my workflow there as well. Really, really clever. But yes, we can see we've got the Azure Static Web Apps deployment here. So it's gone ahead, it's linted those files, it's building them. What it will do then is it will create a preview site for me in my static web app environment. So then I'll get a link back, I can go and check it. Once I'm happy, I merge that into main, and then job done, all good.
So I have a question about the YAML editing. As you know, there is an assistant on Azure Pipelines on the right side.
Yep.
Is there anything similar here?
Yeah, so if you go in the UI and go to this magic GitHub Workflows folder and edit, let's say, one of the files here, you'll get a special UI here that's kind of a similar experience, but you don't have the UI for each individual action. So this is where it works slightly differently, is that you copy and paste over the YAML from there and then kind of edit it that way instead. So slightly different experience, but it does make it easy for you to discover those other pieces in the marketplace and for you to understand how GitHub Actions works, some of the schema that you might need here as well. So this is built in, and I think there is an extension that can help in VS Code as well.
Okay, great.
One more thing. So let me go then back to, yes, let me go to here. Site deployment, here we go. So this line, we can see looks very similar to like the GitHub Actions that we saw earlier. So if I just copy this first bit again, and go github.com, type that in. You can see again, this is just a GitHub repository. But if I go into .github workflows, Azure Static Web App Close PI YAML. So GitHub workflows, Azure Static Web App Close PI YAML. We can see this, again, just looks exactly like a GitHub action workflow because it is still workflow. But the difference here is this is something called a reusable workflow. So notice that the trigger is on a workflow call. So if another workflow calls this, then this thing triggers. So it's like a template. Think of it that way. We take some inputs, friendly environment, GitHub environment, and static web app name. Take some secrets. And then I have an environment variable just for consistency. And then I have my job steps. So we give it a name, it runs on Ubuntu, and we have a load of steps. And it uses the actions just like we've seen before. But the beauty about this approach is I can define this once in a central repository owned by a team. Maybe it's a platform team or something like that. And what they will then be able to do is accept pull requests from any other team. So Mert, if you decided you wanted to go and use this, but something doesn't quite work and you wanted to enhance it, inside your organization, you could see this repository, you could make the pull request the change, and then that central team can review it and go, no, sorry, that won't work because this will break this, but maybe implement it this way and we could accept it. So it's much more collaborative rather than, hey, central team, I need this functionality. When can you get it done by, please? Thanks. So it promotes that inner sourcing model and that really collaborative culture, which is why I really like this. It's really, really cool. But yeah, then what I showed was the action completed that we were looking at earlier. So if I click on here, take a look at the build and deploy step, we can see the link to my preview site, and we can see that new talk that got added there, for example. I know I need to change the banner and I need to change the name of the talk, etc. And I'll add the YouTube link as soon as that's available as well. But you can see that's how easy it was for me to add that new episode to my website. And that is my flow in terms of going from planning, creating the code, testing locally, using GitHub Actions to go into my preview environment, and then eventually merging into my main environment as well. So really, really powerful. A couple of things as well before we do kind of go to any questions and Q&A, etc. There's also security, and security is super, super important these days because, think about open source, the amount of dependencies that we've probably got in our projects. The number of supply chain attacks, I think Sonatype reported on this in their 2021 supply chain report. They reported a 650% increase in supply chain attacks. So think of things like Log4j and other similar vulnerabilities. These are the things as developers we really now need to be concerned about and thinking about, not as an afterthought, but part of what we do on a daily basis. So some things that can help are Dependabot. You can configure Dependabot alerts inside of your repository. You can also turn Dependabot on as well. And what Dependabot is a bot, a tool effectively that lives behind the scenes and can help you keep all of those dependencies up to date. Certain package formats are supported. But then there's some additional capabilities, and this is where it depends whether you've got a public repository or a private repository. If you've got a public repository, you can get access to code scanning and secret scanning, a certain level of secret scanning, I should say, for like cloud providers, etc. But if you're private and you're a team or you're an enterprise, then you would need to use something called GitHub Advanced Security to get those features for your internal repositories, for your private repositories. But again, those are really cool. They could probably be their own session on their own. I don't want to just slot them in at the last minute because that would be the wrong thing to do.
But we could definitely talk about a full hour about security and some of the capabilities there. But everything we've seen is effectively, what is available on GitHub. What I'd encourage people to do, feel free to add me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm very active on both. Would love to chat. Likewise, if you've got any questions, happy to chat as well. But get started on GitHub. Contribute to your first open source project, or maybe try it in your enterprise as well, because there are tons of capabilities there that really make it not just a great tool from that enterprise perspective, but a really social experience to work with your colleagues and fellow developers as well. So that is me. That's what I wanted to show here, Mert.
I am still in shock because of what I saw today. There are lots of great stuff, and thank you very much
Sure.
For this great presentation. As I already mentioned, that will be a great presentation at the beginning. So that's great. Any final words?
No, just to say, as I said earlier, I'm on Twitter at RedoBowen, as you can see on the screen. LinkedIn as well, search for Chris Reddington. Any questions, if you want to chat about GitHub, happy to. And hopefully a few people get started here.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, and thanks for everyone for watching us, and see you soon.